we're hoping to expand on that arts and resilience framework to incorporate climate resilience as well, to support local governments as they help grow resilience for their arts communities, recover from disasters, and build towards more resilient, thriving, climate-ready futures. And as part of that effort, I've recently written a blog post on our website that showcases some of the ways that cities can and have worked with their artist communities to build knowledge of and resilience to climate risks. And so I'm gonna drop the link to that in the chat in case people are interested in more specific examples of things that cities are thinking about or could be thinking about. And you know, I think that sometimes some things like climate change, which feel like an existential threat, make it really easy, or really hard, I should say, to move people from feeling doomed and helpless towards taking action. And it's so challenging to even fathom the paradigm shifts that we have to make to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to build climate resilience. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of local leaders are struggling with, reframing the needed changes that we make as positive for people's everyday lives. And local government is working at that most personal level where people are seeing the everyday impacts of climate change. And I think that's where artists can play a really big role. One, in helping people understand what climate change means for their communities and how to prepare, in helping people understand or imagine what better futures could look like, in making climate action fun, in building the mental and social resilience needed to endure sometimes really devastating disasters. And so at the National League of Cities, we're here to provide local government with the technical assistance and resources they need to create thriving communities. And so for anybody looking for support at this intersection of arts and resilience, or if anyone has a case study that they'd like to elevate, please feel free to reach out or to post it in the chat, even now. And the last thing that I will say before I pass it on to Jan is that for this work to happen, artists need funding to sustain them. And the good news is that there are funding opportunities that local governments can use to support partnerships with artists and cultural organizations. At the federal level, cities can use ARPA funding, and NLC has a fact sheet that I am now sharing in the chat on how to use ARPA funds for the arts. And the fact sheet highlights different ways that ARPA funds can be integrated or can be used to integrate arts partnerships into existing work and all different types of work, and also highlights a few case studies of what cities have done. The second federal piece that I want to elevate is the National Endowment for the Arts' Our Town grant, which is a grant for creative placemaking. That's a broad term and creates a lot of room to bring in the arts and to bring in the arts and partnerships for public art, including artist residencies, art festivals, and much more. The purpose of the Our Town grant is to address local challenges, including health and well-being, transportation and infrastructure, and climate-related risks. And so making that connection between the arts and climate is a really successful strategy. And I will also flag that the deadline is coming up in early August to apply for that grant. And then on the local level, one strategy that local government can use is creating a % for art ordinance, which is a funding mechanism through which a small percentage, generally about 0.5 to 2% of a capital construction or renovation budget, is set aside to commission public art. And funds can either be pooled toward a general public art fund or integrated into specific capital projects. And this % for art ordinance is the most common way that public art programs in jurisdictions across the US are funded. But other mechanisms could also be annual allocations in the town budget, parking meter revenue, and funding through local businesses and crowdsourcing projects. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council up in Massachusetts has a really great resource on this that I will also drop in the chat, but I've been talking for a while now, so I will pass it to Jan so she can take over. But please feel free to drop any questions that you might have.
Aisha, before we turn it over to Jan, just one quick question, just to clarify, what do you think is the distinct value that artists can bring to planning around climate change, both before and after disaster strikes?
Yeah. The thing about climate change is that there's no way to look at it where it's not radical, right? The fact that I was walking outside today and the air is unbreathable is not normal. We should not be having emergency situations every day. And in any kind of situation where radical change is needed, artists play an extremely important role. There's a reason that in any social movement, music is important, that the most successful propaganda on any end of the spectrum uses really memorable visuals. And also, if you think about that other end of the spectrum, when authoritarian governments come into power, why artist communities are one of the first they crack down on. Artists play a really important role in expanding our idea of what is possible and what a better world could look like. And local governments do operate on that most personal level, right? Where people's everyday lives are being affected by climate change, but they're not necessarily thinking about it as this big existential threat. They're thinking about their sidewalks getting hotter and making it more difficult for them to walk to school or to work or to the park. They're thinking about increasing flooding and how that makes it harder to get around, especially if you have a mobility device. There's so many small everyday ways that climate change is dramatically impacting people's lives, and local government has to deal with that personal level where change is really scary. And how do you take that change and make it exciting? And how do you recenter joy in it? I think that is the role that artists can play, and why local government should be using and partnering with artists and cultural organizations to remind people that we do have lots of things to look forward to if we can get this right.
Great, thank you. Now let's turn it over to, thank you, Ayesha, and now let's turn it over to Jan Newcomb.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I enjoyed hearing all about how artists are really important, because that's my background. I was a dancer, and I'm calling from Corning, New York, where I was born and raised. And one of my early memories is when Hurricane Agnes went through town, and my home was under 20 feet of water along with everybody else. And it was the arts in Corning Glassworks that really brought the community back to being very, very quickly. And within just a few years, it was considered one of the best little small art towns in the United States. And that was because they encouraged artists to come downtown and to have their studios and to live there. And it's really been my feeling and understanding of why working together as communities to overcome these things, it can be successful. But I'm executive director of the National Coalition. We call it NCAPER just because it's easier than all those words. And I also work with Matthew on the Performing Arts Readiness Project. I have run 10 organizations, and I think I've faced every crisis and disaster you can. I've learned it on the job, how to deal with it. And so it's been interesting to get into this work that I'm doing now in the last 5 years, is really preparing for things, figuring out how can we assess our risks and have a plan and not just react. So being proactive. So NCAPER was formed in 2006, even though I didn't come on until 2018, when the Mellon Foundation gave us a nice sizable grant to become more sustainable. NCAPER is realized there were organizations that realized that after Katrina and Rita, that 95% of the arts community was not served by FEMA in after a national or natural disaster. And so everybody came together and said, how can we help individual artists, arts organizations, not just the large cultural resources as the definition is by FEMA. So our steering committee members right now, you'll see, are mainly national funders, national service organizations. They fund individual artists as well. I mean, the Music Cares is the nonprofit arm of the Grammys. And NYFA is New York Foundation for the Arts. They fund a lot of individual artists to overcome and prepare for disasters. So there's a broad range of organizations that we work with, and NCAPER advocates for preparedness and disaster support, as I said, for the entire arts sector. We have publications and resources on our ncaper.org that I encourage you to look at, because things like an arts field guide to federal disaster relief, it is taking government writing into like, how do I navigate SBA loans or FEMA loans, or what else can I get from the help from other federal agencies? And it's done in real English, as I say, and offers pathways for artists and arts organizations. We also facilitate post-disaster virtual convenings for affected artists and arts organizations to connect them to funders and service organizations and businesses who can hear what their needs are and offer help, immediate help. We've done this after Maria. I had weekly, then bi-weekly phone calls, Zoom call, then later Zoom calls for over 1 year. Now, Houston after Harvey was only 4 or 5 calls. And we've created a relationship with Kentucky now after their having been to both the western side tornadoes and then the flooding on the eastern side. So we're there to help people immediately, and we also train arts responders to work with their own communities on readiness and mitigation projects. And that it's called the Crisis Analysis and Mitigation Program for Coaches. And the CAM coaches have really done a remarkable job. We're not the only organization that does this, works with in readiness and response and recovery for the arts. But so Arts Ready is part of South Arts. They have been doing this because the South, if you're going to pick a region to have lots of disasters, it is in the South. And so they've been really, since Hugo in '89, I believe, really been focusing on the Surf Plus. They're shooting off to the right, is it is really a emergency relief fund for craft artists, and they have wonderful resources. And then I have MCAPER, and then of course HENTEF, which is a national task force that is funded by FEMA and is part of the Smithsonian. So they do a lot of response work, and we're part of that. And then the Performing Arts Readiness Project that was also funded by NCAPER. So when I talked about gaps in the system and how we don't really treat cultural resources the same, and that FEMA doesn't think of cultural resources as including artists. So we really found that you had all this disaster management sector, but there were gaps. They they didn't have services and information tailored to arts organizations, and they didn't have resources for lost income. And of course, this came out in COVID, very much so. And so that's what we focus on, trying to close those gaps. But the good news is that FEMA realizes that the arts and arts communities can really be very helpful to really be part of what they do. I mean, because they understand that the artists can offer solace, comfort, and connection. So they even have in 2020 published a pamphlet for emergency managers. Now, these are the people on the emergency management side of things, recommending partnerships with artists to communicate risk and to build a culture of preparedness across the nation. And that's because the arts can really translate. I mean, when you're talking about immigrant populations, we can talk to different cultures and understand, we can speak that language. And I know in Kentucky, there was a group of immigrants from Central America. They didn't have any idea what a tornado was. And so they didn't know what to do. I mean, I think any of us who grew up with Wizard of Oz really kind of understood, you go to the basement, but it's something that we all can work on and help FEMA. So these are really specific ways we're trying to advocate to broaden the definition so that everybody in FEMA understands, and in emergency response, that cultural resources must include artists and arts organizations. And we'd love to integrate the arts into FEMA's emergency and recovery support functions, which they have acronyms for, and also include arts partners in preparedness as FEMA support organizations. After Hurricane Sandy, many of the theaters acted as places where FEMA could set up shop to help people fill out forms and to work with people on getting SBA loans and things like that. Those are things that arts organizations, performing arts centers can be, or galleries or museums can be part of that process. So we're working and trying to advocate for more of that sort of thing. We would love to have emergency focused positions at the NEA, at the NEH, and also at NTEF. And we are really working on enabling FEMA to extend its tool replacement grants to self-employed workers, including artists. And that has been because artists are 3.6 times more liable to have the loss of tools, which means the loss of income after disaster. So we do a lot of different things. I encourage you to go to ncaper.org and to really, just look at some of the publications. They're all free, downloadable. And I encourage you and thank you for having me. And I will should I send it to Matthew now?
Matthew, you don't have slides, right?
Yes, he does.
Oh, I got some good ones.
Oh, you got some slides. Yes, yeah, so do send it to Matthew.
Okay.
Makes it more interesting than just looking at my head.
You should be on board. Yeah.
Desiree, I threw a link in there for a great grant program that does do good work with individuals that maybe you could talk your local organizations into modeling something. Hello, my name is Matthew Cowell. I'm coming from Denver, Colorado, on the ceded territory of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho tribes. And I was really glad to hear what Ayesha and Janet talked about. I've known Janet for a number of years. The Performing Arts Readiness organization she talked about has been a great partner for us with this Art of Mass Gatherings program that we're going to talk about here in a moment. And I'm an artist, musician as well, and I do have a guitar nearby, and I'll see if I can figure out a way to weave it in. I'm going to fly through some slides with you to show you what we do and how we've done it. I'm excited about it too, because I think what Ayesha was talking about was how artists can be those sort of folks who step into the breach when really traumatic circumstances are going on, and might have a chance of reaching people like Janet was saying, who on different margins. And so we're pretty excited to share a framework for how this has happened with our organization. Performing Arts Readiness, as Janet said, is a Mellon Foundation funded thing that's been going on. We just got renewed for a third round for going around the country. Here's an artist rendering of what we're talking about. People who are trilingual, they're able to be producing cultural events, they're able to transition during times of emergency, and they're able to do teachers and do mutual aid kinds of moments where we're sharing information. Who are we talking about? We're talking about artists, planners, emergency management folks, accessibility advocates, sustainability companies that build things like solar generators. Why is this interesting? Well, we're saying let's use these cultural gatherings as a window to think about and practice for disruption and response. Resilience officers often say that resilience is a latent feature of a community, and that until a disaster happens, it's hard to know about, measure, assess, or improve. We know better. If you'd like to see how your community will fare during a disaster in the future, go to its festivals today. My background is in producing music festivals around the country. I've done over 120 of them for bicycle advocacy. We raised $5 million with nonprofits around the country, from San Francisco Bike Coalition to Black Women on Bikes DC. And we would have these giant festival parties. We owned and operated our own stages, solar systems, and did 95% diversion from landfill, with a lot of community involvement, a lot of people feeling like they wanted to be in the picture. I went to Standing Rock with my partner, Molly, who's a civil engineer and an urban planner and a bike advocate, and who's taught me a lot of this stuff. I got to say, I didn't come up with this on my own. But when we were at Standing Rock, we really recognized that what we've been creating as festival producers looked a lot like a giant festival, climate change migration, during a wildfire like you see here, and then these political events, these protests. And so when we're talking about mass gatherings, that's what we mean. Thanks to these grants, we've been able to do these from Puerto Rico through 9 other states, and produced some virtual events during the pandemic. One of them was nominated for an Emmy. We were featured in FEMA's inspirational book for arts and experiential learning. That's what I love, expeditionary learning. I really think that getting out of the classroom, and field trips are good for adults too, right? And so how do we do it? We do these experiential workforce developments. We've been sponsored by several states. Like Ayesha saying, we've got these generational opportunity with these Build Back Better funds. And luckily, some of them are going to good places. And workforce development has been a place we've seen a lot of dollars be able to get into this, to professionalize arts and cultural people to be able to do safe, sustainable festivals. We like doing park and festival audits and plans. There's grants available for these. And for all you planners, which I guess is all y'all, we really think that this is a good place to do an assessment of your built environment, your parks and public spaces when it's under load during a festival, and think about how it would be used as a multimodal response site. If you would have talked about our parks getting used for vaccination and hospital sites 5 years ago, people would have thought you were a weird prepper. But we know now that all of our event spaces, this resiliency hub model is really important. And the way we do that is by having stakeholders who are local come and help run these audits with us, folks who are wheelchair users, who are arts and cultural producers. And we see the roses and thorns of what exists there. And we want to guide this flood of money that is looking for good places to go with these community groups. And so we also offer webinars and podcasts that are free thanks to Performing Arts Readiness. You can look that up. I'll send some links. So how do we organize our thinking around what makes a resilient gathering? I based it on this. Anybody knows Nusrat Samin? She's a woman who's a brilliant chef, right? She came to it later in life, but she really realized that when you're scratch cooking, you want to balance salt, fat, acid, heat. And after producing 100 events, I finally figured out what I should have known in the beginning, because we learned the hard way, that you're looking to see if you're creating a space that's safe and accessible and sustainable. And the magic sauce is whether you've got enough community engagement to help be a force magnifier. And if this idea is truly resonant with your community, then they'll support you, right? So we throw these events. We use the festivals as a classroom. We do asset mapping together. This in Puerto Rico was looking at these colors are coordinated with what are the people, places, and things around your island that are a support for safety, sustainability, and accessibility. And then we do classes and these beautiful community events. We have classes on Narcan and on harm reduction and planning for weather emergencies and planning for accessible design. And then when we have multiple days, we do certifications for this. It's a great place for people who are planners and who are emergency managers and event producers to come out of their silos in their offices and meet out in a park. Then this asset mapping can be really a vibrant way that people's ideas come out. And we want to broaden the participation of who's in these emergency preparedness initiatives. Resilience is a really sexy word right now, and it's kind of getting fatiguey. And I really feel like there's got to be some better ways to get this like hitting the road. This is what we're doing. This was Boston last week. Mayor Wu came up and welcomed us to this Boston Art, Music, and Soul Festival that was a host. And they've really taken it on as their own, and that's couldn't make me happier that this is something that they feel like is the city wants to do block parties that do resilience classes and have Berkeley School of Music as part of their curriculum for arts managers is to think that while you're producing these festivals, you're also doing emergency management. They're really similar. Janet's been seeing this, I know, in a lot of her colleges for arts administrators, that you need to be planning for both, right? And field trips are good for adults. It's good to look at these parks as a place where we can study design and look at how it intersects with people with accessibility needs. And a lot of this is boiled down for me is who are we making gatherers and infrastructure accessible to? We're making them accessible for somebody. Let's unbundle who that is and then work backwards to try to make sure that if the safety is planned for people who have the highest need, then it's going to be safe for everybody. And I'm ready to start talking to other people. There we go.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, great. Let's see if there are any comments or questions. I guess while we're waiting for people to type, I'll just start with, in terms of planners and artists working together, what, and this is a question for all of you, I mean, on climate change, are there any, can you give us some model practices or how should planners and artists work together on climate change or resilience? Anybody who wants to start there?
Well, we encourage through our CAM program, the coaching program is bringing all voices in a community together to figure out a community mitigation project. And so the idea is, we know it's going to happen again. How can we make it happen with less trauma? And what happens is that you have the creative sides, and then you have the little more technical people, and we've done some really interesting projects. Homa, Louisiana, the community mitigation project was, there were 3 African-American pastors, the police chief, a lot of different artists, and they keep getting hit by, the climate change, the rising of the waters, and 46% of their population has no Wi-Fi, no access because of just the cost. And so their project was to have an artist designed tree within the community with the most people without Wi-Fi, and have it resistant to category 5 winds, and have it be a power source so that it becomes then the meeting place for people in that community to come together and get information and to even have power sources. Small projects, but it gets the community together. And this local solutions are the long-lasting solutions. I mean, if you come into a community, the best thing you can do is get all their voices together and for them to decide, how are we going to combat this?
I think Matt, thank you, Jen. Matt, you want to add some to this conversation as well?
Well, I'll give this to a planner who taught me about this, and I'm sure you all have heard about tactical urbanism and what Jan's talking about there with making, a project what's tactical urbanism? It's a relatively low cost experiment that you try that's iterative, and before you put a whole bunch of money behind it, you see what kind of works. And artists are great at that, and it's a good place for engineers and planners and artists to come together with that sort of thing. And the other thoughts that guide a lot of where I've seen smart work come from ideas around the cosmopolitan canopy. So how do we become better at making places that self-regulate and that you don't need so many interventions, whether that's police or the architecture doesn't need to be harsh, all of those things. There's an art to how we make those sort of places that are safe in that way. And I would recommend that book, Cosmopolitan Canopy, is a way to think about how food and green spaces and children and music and these places can kind of do some of the work that we would think you'd need to have harsher ways to do that. If that gets at it a little bit, and I'm just a nerd for that sort of stuff, and think that these sort of dialogues are great. Also throw out there that there's CERT programs and MRCs. What are those initials? CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team that FEMA uses. There's lots of volunteers around the country. And the MRCs are medical response corps. So this could be anybody from an EMT through a doctor who likes going into emergencies and disasters and helping out at that time, and giving them fun places to plug in and meeting them is a really valuable way to start building some of those helpers. And Mr. Rogers, he would say, during emergencies, kids, don't worry, there will be helpers. So how do you find those kind of people who are built like that and start planning with them early before the poop hits the fan?
Thanks, Matt.
Can I just jump in really quickly?
Okay.
One more example. I love everything that both Jan and Matt have already said. I want to add in Phoenix's Office of Arts and Culture's public art program, which I feel like is a program worth emulating. They recruit artists to participate in capital projects to bring more life essentially into the projects that they would be doing anyway, and showcase local artistic styles. So they're a lot more fun. So for example, they would create a bus stop that has canopy cover, is painted, has perforation, and also the program tries to spend most of its funding in communities that have been historically disinvested in. And those are the communities that we know are also the hottest. Historically, redline communities are now somewhere between 10 to 15 degrees hotter than historically white communities. And so putting that funding into those communities is not only important to address the immediate climate impacts, but also is a historic corrective and is bringing art to communities that often get ignored.
Thank you. There's a question here from Angela Puerta. What is the best method that you have used to encourage participation from individuals who do not typically participate?
I would go to the stuff that's the most fun, like Ayesha was saying. That tends to be stuff around food and music and things that their kids can do. And I think something that alleviates some pain, right? I'm a recovering marketer. So provides pleasure or reduces pain. Those are the ways you make products that people get excited about, right? And so a lot of pain right now is around gentrification and neighborhoods getting displaced. And you could look at gentrification as a slow moving disaster. It goes slowly, but it pushes people out. And so when you're a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. I like doing events that have those sort of things there and that are beloved, and that becomes the place that you can have these conversations. And it's paradoxical that you would go to these really, I would even say the Pride Fest is one of the most paradoxical, interesting places to study. It was the first place we did an art of mass gatherings. And the reason we did that is that Pride Fests have had to share good emergency plans with each other for over 30 years, 40, 60 years, because of threats of prejudice and violence. And they are celebrating at the same time as it's sort of a protest. And that kind of paradox has power in it. And there's some danger, and there's a lot going on there. And so those communities that have been pretty marginalized are going to show up in those spaces. And if you've I'm married to an engineer, and I know that that's a hard thing for engineers to think about, throwing parties and inviting people over and all of that stuff. But find good friends and go into those spaces where everybody's risking a little bit something, and then the emotions are going to help create the glue. And that's how I see a place to engage those folks. And Angela, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for coming. Thank you so much for the answer.
I just want to add quickly to what was just said, that taking it to the streets also is one of the best ways to engage people. I think if you're holding an event that people have to get to, it's a whole nother obstacle. But if people can just stumble upon it, and I used to work in walkability advocacy, and I'd always say the reason I liked walking was because if you're driving somewhere, you can't just stop in the middle of the road and see something curious going on. If you're walking, you can always take 2 steps back and look at the little box of books that someone has left out on the sidewalk, or see why everyone's huddled up, or listen to the music that's playing. Having things out where people are anyway is a really great way to make sure that people show up, especially the people who wouldn't otherwise be seeking those things out.
I agree with the events idea, but we go one step kind of back from that. Is rather than saying this is the event we're going to do, it comes out of a 3-day workshop with community members, and they decide. For instance, we did one in DMV, DC and Maryland and Virginia, and they chose a very critical neighborhood in Baltimore to have certain events that would help with there's hunger crisis, disaster, and they were dealing with that and trying to get people together in that community through events like food and performance to get them to start talking. And so so I'm just saying, yes, oftentimes events really are the way to go, but if it can be developed from the community it serves, that's an important aspect.
Great point. Or it's already happening and it's already a beloved event, and you go to them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just add here that and then I'll speak for those of you not familiar with my work, or I started the recording late, so you don't know who I am. Worked primarily in the field of creative placemaking over the last 10 years, and I think to really understand the power of arts as a media, these kinds of activities as a vehicle for engaging people, it's good to think about the fact that the traditional methods that we as planners use to engage people can be somewhat intimidating, can be off-putting to people. I mean, who really wants to go to another meeting? And especially when most people's conception of a town hall meeting, let's say, is a bunch of angry people, sitting there talking about what they're complaining about. But with the arts, arts is less threatening, especially if you have some kind of art making activity, particularly if you can involve children. Because if you can get the kids, you can get their parents. But also when people are having fun, particularly in areas where, let's say, there's a significant amount of tension. If people are having fun, if people are feeling comfortable with other people that they wouldn't normally speak with, they're going to be more open to sharing ideas. You can do a simple survey. If people are enjoying themselves. I mean, don't bother them while they're eating or anything, but you can do that. And also art making, community, giving people opportunities in being involved in making art. Communal art is certainly a community building activity, but also if you're giving them opportunities to share their experiences through some kind of art form, storytelling, dance, etc., you're actually getting in some ways much richer data about communities, about the experience of place, than you would in a typical survey. So I think Matt, you wrote, those meetings are often filled with the usual suspects, right? You're talking about the town hall, yeah. Usually the same people show up, the people who show up for everything, but and it's biased. It's biased to people with more money, with more people who are more extroverted, people who tend to be more pissed off than than other people might be, because they're the ones who are going to make sure they're at the meeting. So great. Let's see, are there any other comments? I don't see any of the questions. So what I'd like to do, because there are people here who have experience, is if anybody would like to share their experience, if you're a planner who's worked with artists, or if you're an artist who's worked with planners on climate change, on disaster preparedness, or working with artists after disasters, going back to the fact that we're in hurricane season here on the East Coast, would anybody like to share their experiences, their thoughts? Desiree, I think I saw your hand up, or
yeah, I mean, I'm an artist and activist based in Flint, Michigan. I'm a Flint native, but I went away and came back in 2011 at that critical moment of the master plan, and I was the public arts advisor for the master plan. And so I worked a lot I worked on an Our Town grant, and then the water crisis happened. And so I really saw from a civic, like what happened, how those decisions got made, and then actually was able to create a piece at a time that no one was locally wanted to talk about it. And so it was and then working through the media frenzy, and then now and the recovery stage, and seeing how we were not prepared and how those things happened, but also how recovery funding got diverted to institutions and not to local people on the ground. And it's almost been a blackout for us, for folks on the ground. And so how do we, without the support from local institutions who want to move into a gentrification stage, while people are still grieving, people are still living through and surviving, how do we get access to funding right now? Because it's been very, very difficult, just to be honest, as someone that's working in community, and the community has this tension, this shame for denial. So we want to sweep it all under the rug, and now like working on air quality, because we have Ajax is coming into our town, right? That's part of, so we have now climate crisis and a water crisis. And how do we create structures where folks can get access to funds beyond institutions? So that's where I'm at.
Okay. Thanks, Desiree. I see that Matt has put in some comments in the chat there. I don't know, Ayesha or Jen or Matt, did you want to respond to what Desiree was just saying?
I'll put a little color on that comment real quick. So if you've heard of community health workers as a new profession, that's just sort of the way that like doulas were becoming a profession a few years ago. And I really see artists as having a place as maybe that being a dual mode of what they do, is thinking about community health work, and then the Latino community, it's promotoras de salud, and this is can either be working with individuals or an entire community. And to your point about finding funding for individuals more so than just institutions, I think these workforce development grants that are out there right now, where people can get learn and earn programs and go and get supported to get and I would point to Janet's program too, with the oh gosh, Jan, what's the name of that cool program?
Cam?
Yeah, your CAM program. I think that it's a development program for nonprofit leaders, but it could be a lot of different people who come from a diverse background and get a certification as disaster response folks, resilience hub designers, community health, and then I think then you have a job to jump in on beat if the tune changes and there's another economic disruption. This way, artists themselves become multimodal earners. The same way we want to look at our arts and cultural venues and our parks as multimodal. They're throwing community events during sunny days, they're responding and supporting during stormy days. How can artists develop that themselves so that when they're not the first ones in line for the soup, they learn how to make the soup?
I'm going to jump in from the community foundation world where I'm in now and just say that community foundations can also be great partners. But every community foundation's mission is to improve the quality of life in their community. And so a number of them, including our own, are concerned with climate change and resilience. So Jen, I couldn't tell if you want to say something.
I just saw that Lena Walker has her.
Yes, I was just gonna.
So I can wait until.
Okay, great. Lena, you have a question? Or Lena, I'm sorry if I'm.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's Lena. You got it. And I don't want to interrupt. I'm enjoying listening to the conversation that you're having. So I guess I'll just keep my comment brief. Just when you had asked about wanting to share experiences, and some of you kind of talked about this already, but it's just, sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought. I guess I was interested in learning more about thinking of art as a way to share important like skill sets and sort of our like cultural knowledge and skills about how to have climate resiliency. So thinking about it not just in a form of resilience, like bringing community together after a disaster, but also really thinking about it as like a kind of a knowledge infrastructure through which we can share critical information much more effectively than sometimes governments do through, like official channels or written documents or something like that. And I think when I think of that, it really comes from the, growing up very much steeped in like punk culture, and that sort of realizing as a now decrepit person who can't really tear it up in the pit like I used to, but I still really enjoy like engaging with the art of the punk movement. You really start to see how all the little pieces that sort of make up that subculture are each sort of communicating key pieces of information, whether it's how to maintain, an independent press, or how to, take care of each other in times of like being persecuted by the police or other things. So I don't know, just would love to learn more about people who are working with art and climate resiliency, specifically from that sort of like skill sharing and knowledge sharing perspective.
Yeah, I can step in very quickly. In my neighborhood here in DC, at the farmers market, they have these big signs up and on lots of different merch that says, "What's more punk than the public library?" And I think that speaks to what a lot of communities are trying to do more of now, which is invest in social infrastructure, particularly through community resilience hubs, which are existing community centers where information is already being exchanged, where community might be organizing around rent and housing rights, but also sharing resources in a time of emergency. And that way, when there is an emergency situation, we don't suddenly have to disseminate all of these resources. They are already in trusted spaces. And I think that's a really good model. I haven't seen it explicitly within an arts context, but I do think that plays an important role, and curious if Matthew or Jan have other ideas about that.
Well, the CAM program really, hopefully it will be in every state and territory so that there can be activation teams that are working and know each other. You don't have to wait till something happens. You're already communicating across communities. And I just one thing I usually try to encourage artists is to really become leaders in their communities. Like who was Desiree? Like your involvement in that. I mean, Amelia Brown in Milwaukee was also another one. I mean, she just was really, really wonderful in her ideas of having artists really have a strong voice. It makes a huge difference. After Hurricane Agnes in '72, this community that I'm in, Corning, happened to have the most benevolent leadership in the Corning Glassworks. The first thing was the foundation came out and said, anybody who had a summer job, you know, wants a summer job, you are employed by the foundation to clean up everybody in the community. And the Glassworks said the same thing. We're taking over for everyone. It doesn't matter if you work for the Glassworks or not. We're all in this together. So 17 miles down the road is Elmira. They couldn't talk to each other. They were just blah, 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 blah. And they are still 50 something years later, they have gone downhill. Whereas the community that really worked together in one voice made a much better community. Our downtown is, oh my gosh. And I just look at that as local leadership, and artists need to be not sitting back. You need to be proactive. So I congratulate you, Desiree, as a strong artist to get involved in your community. It's important.
I do have to say that I am formally trained as a community organizer, so that helped me during the water crisis.
Yeah, I was trained as a dancer, choreographer. I'm always working with people. So, you know, we all come at it differently, but it's so important.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock right now on the East Coast, so I'm going to just give Matt and Ayesha just if they want to say a quick word, responding to what Jan said.
I just threw some lefty, propaganda in the chat, but mutual aid's a great idea, right? What's the difference between charity and mutual aid? The old model of charity says, we got what you need. We know what you should do. If you're deserving, we'll give it to you. Mutual aid is a lot more about what we seem to be talking about today. And so there is a lot of infrastructure made for some of these things in the past. The CERT programs have been populated by white dudes in old police cruisers with CB radios on the roof. And it might be a little scary, but if we put diversity into those CERT programs, then we don't have to reinvent all of that infrastructure, and we can go in there and be agents of change. And I know the new directors of CERT are really cool and are looking for this kind of diversity. So I'd encourage it.
Thanks, Matt. Ayesha, do you want to take the last word there?
Sure. I just want to say that it's been such a pleasure to hear from all of you. I really appreciate that this group was not just a panel, but also a conversation with everyone here. And I've learned a lot. I hope that we can keep these conversations going.
Great. Thank you to Jan Newcomb, Matthew Chekwaz, and Ayesha Mehrotra for this great panel discussion. And folks, please enjoy the summer. And our fearless leader, Cheryl, has just come back on stage here. So I'll actually give Cheryl the last word.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Leo, for moderating. We really appreciate Matt, Jan, and Ayesha's comments today. And if you're not a member of the Arts and Planning Division, I'll say it one more time. Leo said it at the top. Please feel free to join us. We love having these kind of conversations, and we try to get together with our members and community at least every other month. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.